So some of the conversations I've been having with people as we've all kind of been, gathering, I was referencing some videos, things that I shared with people. And this was what I shared in my newsletter. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you can go to my website and sign up for my newsletter. But what I'm trying to do with this newsletter, the reason why I started this newsletter is I started a Sunday morning online remote meditation group. There's a lot of these things going, and I thought I would offer that as well. So every Sunday at 9 a.m. Central Time, I offer a 20-minute guided meditation. And what I've done is the meditations that I'm offering are themed by month. So, a particular sutta or particular instruction for a style of Vipassana practice is the theme for that month. And that's what I kind of direct my guided practice around. Well, so to remind people of that practice on Sunday, I started sending out these reminders on Saturday. And I didn't want it just to be a reminder. So I started including some suttas, some specific teachings. And I'm trying to, and it's just kind of something I'm enjoying because it's really starting to expand into other things. First it was, hey, more than just a reminder, here's a sutta. And now more than just a sutta, I'm trying to correlate it to something in real life, something in real life. So this last sutta that I included really kind of emphasized a particular teaching that you've probably all heard in some form or another, where by looking after ourselves, we look after others. And by looking after others, we look after ourselves. That comes out of a specific sutta called the Bamboo Acrobat. And so I put that in there, and then someone sent me a video and I found it really inspiring, and it had that element of people looking after others and looking after themselves. Basically in the video, these guys, they hike to this remote cabin on a mountain peak, and it's a treacherous hike. And you see where they're constantly kind of checking with one another. Are you doing okay? Are you all right? And there's this moment where they take a kind of a safety break and they say, okay, really take care of yourself. If you fall, we're so remote that, there's not going to be anything anyone can do for you. Be careful. And so I was watching this video and enjoying it, and I thought, wow, it reminds me of that sutta. And so I just decided to plug that in. And so anyway, if any of this sounds interesting, then this is what I'm going to continue to endeavor to do with these reminders on Saturday, to actually give you a sutta that you can kind of practice with over the course of your week. And these reminders about the Sunday morning sits that I'm doing online. And just some other things that I can talk about, because I don't know. I never prepare my Dharma talks. I rarely prepare Dharma talks. When I prepare my Dharma talks on retreat, I just give myself some bullet points so it has some semblance of being linear. So here's my preparation for tonight's talk. But what I wanted to say is, that recently we've redesigned the MOI logo. And thank you for helping us get the logo on the door. But I wanted to just say that you notice there's two Bodhi leaves there. One represents us teaching the Dharma, and the other one represents our outreach work in the community. So we're a resource, we're an insight meditation organization offering the Buddha's teachings. And we're also an outreach organization. So if you come to us, you're getting the Buddha's Dharma. If we do our outreach work, we're offering mindfulness instruction in a secular way so that it's accessible to everyone. And in that way, we can go into schools, we go into hospitals, we go into recovery centers and the jail. We worked in corporations. I've been working with Mutual of Omaha, offering mindfulness wellness training for ever since 2016. So there's a lot of these outreach things that we do as an organization that, feel bring some benefit to the community. I'm going to reference something from here. So I was just talking earlier. these are the suttas. A lot of what's here, though, is commentary, but these are the teachings of the Buddha, and it's not just this book and this book. It's like 3, 4 other books that compile. Yeah, it's like a, and I think one of the things that I was saying earlier is that this is all written by one bhikkhu, Bhikkhu Bodhi. Some of you are familiar with Bhikkhu Bodhi because there's the book that Mark has been passing out, the book that I encouraged all the MOI teachers to really dive into and use as a resource. It's that little tiny book, and it's so rich that you can read like a paragraph and practice with it for like a month, you know. Anyway, Bhikkhu Bodhi is probably one of the eminent scholars in this tradition of practice, the Pali tradition. At least for us Westerners, he's really key. And what I was saying is, we think about how we read some of the suttas and we hear about these supernormal powers that arhats have. People who have reached that moment of enlightenment, they become an arhat, an enlightened being. And they have some of these extraordinary abilities that come with their enlightenment. And we think, well, gosh, is that still possible? And I look at how much this guy produces, all of these books, and I think that's kind of like a supernormal power. If when I think about this book and like 6, 7 other books that are just this big, and it's like, how do you find the time? I mean, he's a monastic, he's a scholar, this is what he does, but I mean, I find it really impressive that he takes this time to translate the Pali, the language of the Buddha, to English, commentate on it. He's got just such a brilliant mind for that. And yeah, so one of the, I don't know if it was really a supernormal power, but one of these things that we kind of look back on and it's like, oh, that explains it. There was the Buddha's attendant, Ananda, who is said to have like a perfect memory. And I think for a lot of people in the past, you would think, wow, that's amazing. How does he have this memory? Anything that he heard from the Buddha, he could remember it. That sounds extraordinary. But now we kind of think, oh, yeah, there are people with that attribute of, having a photographic memory, as we say. And so it doesn't sound so far-fetched, but before, to be able to talk to somebody and they know exactly what you said, they're able to repeat verbatim everything you just said, that would seem like some amazing power. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is spiritual friendship, essentially. Kalyatamita. I think I'm saying that right. So, but I'm going to begin with just this here. This is a sutta. It's kind of referred to as half of the holy life. And so I'm just going to read this. It's pretty short. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling among the Shaktis, where there was a town of the Sakyans named Nagarata. I'm not very good at pronouncing these Pali names, so forgive me. Then the Venerable Ananda approached the Blessed One. Having approached, he paid homage to the Blessed One, sat down to one side, and said to him, Venerable Sir, this is half of the holy life. That is, good friendship, good companionship, good comradeship. And the Blessed One said, no, not so, Ananda, not so, Ananda. This is the entire holy life, Ananda. That is, good friendship, good companionship, good comradeship. When a bhikkhu has good friend, a good companion, a good comrade, it is to be expected that he will develop and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path. So I'm just referencing this. Some of you have maybe heard others reference it, but it's just this interesting place where Ananda says, wow, having somebody in your life that understands the Dharma, that you can be friends with, that you can talk about the Dharma with, explore each other's experiences, be of support to one another, come together and practice, basically people in the Sangha. He said, this is half of the holy life. And for the Buddha to say, not so, it's the whole of the holy life. And I thought that was interesting, and so I found this other sutta where this monk, he's the attendant. Um, his name was, again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Meghaya. And this is the Meghaya Sutta. And he was the Buddha's attendant. He was watching out after the Buddha. And he says to the Buddha, I'd like to go on alms rounds. I'd like to go into the village to go on alms rounds. And the Buddha says, okay, if you think you need to do so, then go ahead. And so the next morning he goes off and he goes for his alms rounds. And on his way back, he sees this mango grove. And he was just struck by it. He's like, oh, it's so beautiful. This would be ideal to go off and practice meditation. This would be a great place to exert oneself in practice. It's beautiful. He felt so inspired by it. And so he goes back to the Buddha and he says, oh, Blessed One, I found this awesome spot. I can't wait to go practice there. And he asked for the Buddha's permission. And the Buddha said, well, it's just us. I don't have anyone else to look after me. If you go, I'll be alone. So don't go. But this guy was he's like, oh, you've already done everything you need to do. I need to do this. And so he asked the Buddha a second time, and the Buddha said, no, I would be all alone. You need to be with me. And finally, the guy was like, if you know anything about the suttas, it's always about asking for something 3 times. And on the 3rd time, you can't be refused. So he knows this, and he finally asked the Buddha the 3rd time, dude, come on, let me go practice in this amazing grove. I know that this is going to be a boon to my practice. And finally, the Buddha says, okay, if you feel this is what is needed for your practice, see ya. And so he goes to practice in this mango grove. And so now I'm going to kind of reference a little bit of this. So the Buddha says to him, you may do so, Meghaya, at your own convenience. Then in the morning, Venerable Meghaya, dressed, took his bowl and robe, and let's see, I gotta find the right spot here. He's talking about the mango grove is truly lovely, delightful, suitable for striving of a clansman intent on striving. If the Blessed One permits me, I will go back to that mango grove to strive. So if the Blessed One would permit me, I will go back to that mango grove and strive. And the Buddha says, as we are alone, Meghaya, wait until another bhikkhu comes along. A second time, Venerable Meghaya, said Blessed One, Bhante, for the Blessed One, there is nothing further to be done, and no need to increase what has been done. But Bhante, I have something further to be done, the need to increase what has been done. If the Blessed One would permit me, I will go back into that mango grove to strive. And so that's kind of how he's going about asking. And so then finally the Buddha says, you may go at your convenience. Then the Venerable Meghaya rose from his seat, paid homage to the Blessed One, and then he moved about him, keeping his right side toward him, and went to the mango grove. He entered and sat down at the foot of a tree to pass the day in practice, in meditation. So I think just right there, how many of you have thought about your day of practice and thought, oh, I can't wait to practice. It's the weekend. I'm going to sit all day Saturday. I can't wait. Have you heard? I'm going to go practice Saturday. If you want, you can come over and watch me. Just having that excitement for your practice. Well, so if you want to come over here Saturday, there's a day retreat. Then while Venerable Meghaya was dwelling at the mango grove, 3 kinds of bad, unwholesome thoughts frequently occurred to him. Sensual thoughts, thoughts of ill will, and thoughts of harming. It then occurred to him, this is truly astounding and amazing. I have gone forth out of faith from the household life into homelessness, yet I am still stalked by these three kinds of bad, unwholesome thoughts, sensual thoughts, thoughts of ill will, and thoughts of harming. So he's all excited, and he gets there, and he's like just looking at his mind, right? That's what we practice doing. And he sees in his mind lust, and he sees in his mind ill will, and he sees in his mind that wanting to cause harm. And he's like, I thought this was it. I thought I was going to get enlightened. And here this mind is doing this same thing that it's always done. And so what's the word when you say expletive? Yeah. So he shares those expletives. Then Venerable Meghaya approached the Blessed One. So he had these thoughts, and eventually he's like, okay, this isn't working out. So the Venerable Meghaya approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side, and said, "Here, Bhante." So Bhante is it's a term for teacher. So you hear a lot of Bhante, like Bhante Guttaratana. He's the one who wrote the book Mindfulness in Plain English. My friend that I've just made in Dallas, Bhante Sumeta. Bhante, while I was dwelling in the mango grove, three kinds of bad, unwholesome thoughts frequently occurred to me: sensual thoughts, thoughts of ill will, and thoughts of harming. It then occurred to me, this is truly astounding and amazing. I have gone forth out of faith or confidence in his practice from the household life into homelessness, and yet still I am stalked by these three kinds of bad, unwholesome thoughts: lust, ill will, and harming. Meghaya, when liberation of mind has not matured, 5 things lead to its maturation. What 5? So that's the Buddha. And so he goes through these 5 things. And so I thought, wow, this is really helpful, right? Because don't you have sensual thoughts that come into your mind when you're trying to practice that, the mind can spin out on, run wild with? And don't you sometimes feel like, you know what, that guy, that person, they mistreated me. I don't like them. I wonder if there's a way I can get them back. These are very common things for this mind of ours. And so the Buddha is saying, when liberation of the mind has not matured, 5 things lead to its maturation. Here, Meghaya, a bhikkhu has good friends, good companions, and good comrades. When liberation of mind has not matured, this is the first thing that leads to its maturation. Again, a bhikkhu is virtuous. So here's the next one. Again, a bhikkhu is virtuous. He dwells restrained by I think it's pronounced patimokkha. Basically, for a monastic, so you all take the 5 precepts, right? The 5 precepts of non-harming. If you were a monastic, a nun, or a monk, you would take precepts, 227. So here, the second one, the Buddha is saying, taking these precepts, this is a protection. So taking the 5 precepts is a protection. So again, a bhikkhu virtuous dwells restrained by the precepts, possessed of good conduct, and seeing danger in minute faults. Having undertaken the training rules, he trains in them. When liberation of mind has not matured, this is the second thing that leads to its maturation. So the word that I found most interesting is the one restraint, being restrained. When I talk about taking the precepts, I talk about them as a protection. You are protecting your sila. Your sila is your virtue. You're protecting your virtue when you follow the 5 precepts. There's been so many instances. Before I kind of even formally took the precepts, there was just this kind of recognition of karma. And so I would not follow through with certain actions because I could see the karmic results. Oh, this leads to an unhappy destination. I'm not going to do this. And later seeing it in the context of, oh, well, I was really just kind of following one of the precepts. But when I look back on these things and I think, oh, man, my life would be miserable if I had taken that action. If I had said that thing, there would have been so much suffering in the remorse. And so when I talk about when we take the precepts, the result of taking the precepts is non-remorse. It's such a wonderful feeling to know, like, okay, there's no harm that I have caused. You know, it's like I can make amends for certain things, but then it's like there's only so much amending that you can do. At some point, you have to make your commitment not to cause any further harm. And then it's like, wow, it's like streamlining your life. It feels so freeing not to be burdened by, I hope no one finds out about that thing. I hope that person is okay. I hope they've been able to let go because I've let go. Or have I? Because here I am thinking about what I did and said. And so following the precepts when liberation of mind has not matured, this is the second. And then here comes the third. Again, a bhikkhu gets to hear at will, without trouble or difficulty, talk concerned with the austere life that is conducive to opening up the heart. That is, talk on fewness of desires, on contentment, on solitude, on not getting bound up with others, on arousing energy, on virtuous behavior, on concentration, on wisdom, on liberation, on knowledge and vision of liberation. When liberation of mind has not matured, this is the third thing that leads to its maturation. So what do you think he's talking about there? I think he's talking about hearing the Dharma, right? So that's one of these things that, hearing the Dharma, it's such a rare thing. When you're like sitting in this group or you're on a retreat and you're sitting on a cushion, it doesn't feel rare, but it is extraordinarily rare that you are here. It is extraordinarily rare that you have enough innate wisdom that recognizes the importance and the value of the Dharma. Very rare. And so that's kind of just the beginning of it. It's like it's rare that you recognize the benefit of it. Even rarer that you then see the benefit and say, oh, I'm going to actually practice this. I'm not just going to like recognize it as like, oh, that would be, yeah, that's some good stuff. That's good for everybody else. But then to actually say, oh, I'm going to align my life with this. I'm actually going to practice this. And it's not like, oh, I'm going to practice this religion. I think the clear seeing really is that, oh, I'm going to practice aligning myself with nature. More accurately, I'm going to practice aligning myself with the truth. I'm not going to align myself with how I wish things could be. I'm going to align myself with how things actually are. I'm not going to practice this rose-colored glasses kind of life. I'm going to get real. I want to practice realism. I don't want to practice delusion. I want to practice being real. And so here's the fourth. Again, a bhikkhu has aroused energy for abandoning unwholesome qualities and acquiring wholesome qualities. He is strong, firm in exertion, not casting off the duty of cultivating wholesome qualities. When liberation of mind has not matured, this is the fourth thing that leads to its maturation. So the four great efforts, something that I've taught a lot about. Making effort to abandon unwholesome qualities of mind and cultivating wholesome qualities of mind. You have to have a lot of mindfulness to be able to do that. I was talking to a group that I was teaching online today. And you have to have enough mindfulness to become lucid in the moment to actually see what your mind is practicing. If you, and what that is, it's all the previous moments of practice that lead up to that one moment when you can practice and wake up enough, have enough sobriety of mind to see crystal clear, holy crap, I'm sitting here practicing misery. And the amount of effort that it takes to practice misery, I could take that same effort and practice happiness. Doesn't mean it's easy to do so, but you have to at least have that awareness to recognize, this mind, it's wrapped up in judgment. It's wrapped up in resentment. Let me direct my attention to something that is going to be onward leading for my practice. Let me instead practice friendliness, goodwill towards others. It's so easy to just settle back and be pissed and to be, really in that place of ill will towards somebody who has mistreated you, done you wrong. The amount of courage and resolve it takes to train the mind to actually forgive, let go, practice goodwill in relationship to somebody who has let their suffering spill out of their lives into your life. So that's the fourth. And here's the fifth. Again, a bhikkhu is wise. He possesses the wisdom that discerns arising and passing away, which is noble and penetrative and leads to the complete destruction of suffering. When liberation of mind has not matured, this is the fifth thing that leads to its maturation. When Meghaya, a bhikkhu, has good friends, good companions, and good comrades, it can be expected of him that he will be virtuous, one who dwells restrained by the precepts, and that he'll train in them. When a bhikkhu has good friends and good companions, good comrades, it can be expected of him that he will get to hear at will, without trouble or difficulty, talk concerned with the austere life that is conducive to opening up the heart, that is talk of fewness of desires, that is a talk on the knowledge and vision of liberation. When a bhikkhu has good friends, good companions, good comrades, it can be expected of him that he will arouse energy for the abandoning of unwholesome qualities, not casting off the duty of cultivating wholesome qualities. When a bhikkhu has good friends, good companions, good comrades, it can be expected of him that he will be wise, possessing the wisdom that discerns arising and passing away, which is noble and penetrative and leads to the complete destruction of suffering. There you go. Get to work. The complete destruction of suffering sounds pretty good to me. Having based himself on these 5 things, the bhikkhu should develop further 4 things. Wait a minute. I had 5 things and now you have an additional 4 things? Sheesh. So, one thing that's interesting about this teaching, this is in the coming out of the Numerical Discourses. So as you hear this, you might think, the Numerical Discourses, the suttas, I'm going to go look. And as you start to look, you'll be like, it's grouped in these numerical things. Like, here's the 3 this, here's the 4 this, here's the 5 this. I'm going to look for the 5 things. But I'm just pointing this out. You won't find it in the 5 things. You need to look in the 9 things. Okay? Because there's 5 things plus 4. Having based himself on these 5 things, the bhikkhu should develop further another 4 things. The perception of unattractiveness should be developed to abandon lust. Do you all know what that means? Yeah.
Pursue it.
Some of us are better at that than others. Hold on a second. That's so cool. Okay. All right. So what it means is we look at the appearance of things. You know, we look at one another and we think, ah, beautiful, so attractive, such lovely hair, you know, but then find one of those hairs in your tea and suddenly it's like, whoa, gross. All of the attractiveness is just stripped away because now you're a little more closer to the truth of this body. So yeah, it's wonderful to recognize, you know, beauty. I like the word continence of a face, you know. But you want to also see the truth of this body. That's part of what the death meditation is all about. A little bit, you know, mindfulness of the body, it's mindfulness of the parts of this body. And as you begin to explore, you can begin to see it's like, oh, I'm not my hair. I'm not my fingernails. I'm not my skin. I'm not these bones. I'm not these muscles. I'm not this. I'm not that. I can't remember what it's called, but it's comes from, I think, Greek philosophy, this thought experiment. This is kind of sidetracking a little bit, but what the heck. So you imagine a ship in the shipyard and it needs some repairs. And you know, you go to the ship and you make your repairs. You know, you switch out the sails and then the rigging needs to be changed. And then maybe there's some of the wood starting to rot, so you have to change that. Well, eventually, you change everything about the ship. Everything about the ship has been replaced. Is it the same ship? Every single part of that ship has been replaced, so is it the same ship that you started with? Is there a ship there in the first place? Same is true of this body. You know, everything that we take a sense of identity in, we identify with this body. To the extent that we identify with this body, we're going to suffer galore because this body is changing. It's impermanent. This is not the same body it was, you know, that whole thing of like every cell in your body has changed in 7 years. There's nothing that's still original in this body. It's all changed. So it's interesting when we go looking for a self. The Buddha didn't say you don't exist or you do exist. He said whatever you go looking at is not self. Not self. Not self. Not self. No self. Whatever you look at, there will be no self to be found. And so when you cultivate that understanding and this body naturally changes, it's not a shock, it's not a surprise, it's not something to lament. It's just, oh yeah, that's the nature of things. Things change. You have to be so ruthlessly honest with yourself when it comes to this kind of a practice. If you delude yourself in thinking that, oh yeah, I got this, reality will teach you. You know, it'll give you that hard smack across the face that, no, surprise, you don't have this. It takes a real sincere, honest effort to really practice like, oh yeah, this is not self. And as you begin to look, you begin to see like, this body is unattractive. This body is not sexually attractive. You know, if we could all turn ourselves inside out, we would be like, yeah, that's not attractive. If we took all of the skin, put it in a bucket, all of the muscles, put it in a bucket, all of the bones, put it in a bucket, where are you to be found? What in that is sexually attractive? And so it's not to like go all into this of like, yeah, oh, I'm surrounded by, you know, ugliness. You know, it's not to go all in because that's not helpful. The Buddha didn't teach about extremes. He taught about the middle path. So if you find yourself really lusting for the opposite sex or any bodies, if you find yourself really lusting for the human form, this is something that you can practice. Start practicing the truth of this body. Not only being attracted to the appearance of the body, but really beginning to remind yourself, in other words, mindfulness, sati, self-remembering, remind yourself that, oh, this body is also pus, blood, bile, all of the things that we don't consider. The other really interesting thing about this body is it's not just us. There's like a million things living on this body, a trillion things living in this body. It's not just us. There's all this other life is going along for the ride. Every time your face itches, that's because there's a little mite jumping around, from one pore to the other. Anyway, like I said, kind of getting sidetracked there. Yeah, it's like, all right, where was I? A bhikkhu has good friends and good companions. Okay. So, hearing the Dharma, arousing energy and effort. So, it can be expected of him that he will follow the precepts. It can be expected of him that he will have the opportunity to hear the Dharma. And it can be expected of him that he will abandon unwholesome qualities of mind and cultivate wholesome qualities of mind. When a bhikkhu has good friends, good companions, good comrades, it can be expected of him that he will be wise, possessing the wisdom that discerns the arising and passing away, which is noble, penetrative, and leads to the complete destruction of suffering. And then the four things again, having based himself on these 5 things, the bhikkhu should develop further an additional 4 things. The perception of the unattractiveness should be developed to abandon lust. Loving kindness should be developed to abandon ill will. Mindfulness of breathing should be developed to cut off thoughts. The perception of impermanence should be developed to eradicate the conceit, I am. When one perceives impermanence, the perception of non-self is stabilized. One who perceives non-self eradicates the conceit, I am, which is nibbana in this very life. Have you ever had a moment's experience where you ceased to exist? They happen like in an instant, like a flickering. And it's usually when you recognize that it's happened that you disrupt the whole process. It's kind of like sometimes you're exerting yourself physically, or the body's just doing what it needs to do to take care of a job, and you suddenly kind of recognize that you're not in that place of constantly selfing, constantly narrating everything you're doing. It's just the body's, doing what it's been tasked to do. Or you found yourself in some meditative state where you're not in that place of constantly selfing. Am I doing this right? Am I not doing this right? How am I looking? I'm looking good. Yeah, all sorts of activities where we get so caught up in selfing, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting to put yourself at the center of the universe. And yet, man, that's prevalent in our culture. So much self-centered, self-focusing, self-help. But, you might find it happening when you really make yourself of service. In the practice of compassion, you're making yourself available to someone else. And you see like, oh, there's not this self-centeredness. There's not this identification with self. The mind's just completely focused, and you suddenly recognize it, and it's this moment of reprieve. And you suddenly recognize like, wow, there's all this energy. Because it's so exhausting, and it takes so much energy to establish such a self-importance. And when you can begin to shift that energy, stop practicing self-importance, you suddenly find, wow, you've got this huge surplus of energy that you can direct towards practice. One of these things that I notice, you'll hear teachers talk about it. I try to talk about it when on retreat, but you'll notice when people come on to retreat, how it's kind of like this buildup of pressure, this energy. You know, you're following the instructions for practice, and it's like a balloon. This is the way my teacher talks about it. It's like a balloon being blown up, and expands and expands, and it gets to this point where it's like there's a pressure there. And to release that pressure, that's what we look to do. We try to release that pressure because it's like, ah. And so we try to look for all of our old ways of releasing that pressure. You know, so maybe we pull up Netflix on our phone in our room in the evening and we watch our favorite show. Or we go to the bulletin board of the retreat center and we read the notes that are there for the 5,000th time. Or we find ourselves, you know, doing our yogi job and we're reading the backs of labels on things, just looking for that typical release that we find to avoid the discomfort that we find ourselves in, that suffering. Well, so this particular discomfort of our practice, it's this buildup of energy. And the idea is that that's a really valuable energy. Don't waste it. Don't run off and go read a book. Don't run off and journal about your practice. Direct your practice, direct that energy back into your practice. A lot of times you'll see yogis, and I'm telling you about this just so that when you find yourself on retreat that you don't do this. You'll see yogis kind of wandering around just aimlessly. They're like zombies looking for that thing that they can release that buildup of energy. You know, they've been sitting in their posture for 8 hours off and on through the course of the retreat, and then suddenly they're like, oh, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to go do that, I'm going to go get another cup of tea. It's like, how many times do you have a cup of tea in your daily life, and then suddenly you're on retreat and tea's like, that's the thing. Never drank so much more tea until I went on retreat. But you're looking for this thing to kind of, you know, so the idea is to practice that mindfulness of like, well, what's going on here? What is the unpleasant feeling tone that I'm trying to avoid? What is the idea of the pleasant feeling tone that I'm chasing after? One of the key things here is one of the key 4 things is to practice seeing the arising and passing away. That it leads to Nibbana. This is something that I talk about all the time in practice. And when you see the changing nature of something, when you actually see it, feel it in your bones, and trust me, it's like you can see things changing all the time and it doesn't click. But at some point in your practice, you're going to see something change right before your eyes, and it's going to be like an epiphany. It's going to be like oh, holy shit, this is it. And when it changes, the craving for whatever it is falls away. The aversion to whatever it is falls away. When the mind sees the truth of change, it is naturally free. When you can, like, say you're sitting, and you notice that you're craving something and you're thinking, oh, it'd be so much better if I was, you know, dancing on the beach in Cancun rather than sitting here. Whatever it might be, the mind will try to trick you into being mindful of Cancun. And that's not going to be so helpful. But what will be helpful is if you can see what the mind is practicing. And the mind's in that place of greed, wanting, craving for something. Direct the mindfulness to the craving itself. Be steadfast. Watch. Gain that vision and knowledge and see that craving, just like everything else, is impermanent. And when you see that change, you'll be like, oh, you're free. The mind's just naturally free. It's like, oh, thank goodness I didn't have to go all the way to Cancun to find peace. What a hassle that would have been. So the way that I've kind of illustrated and narrated this for people is I just encourage you, and some of you have heard me say this, encourage you to imagine something that you just desperately want, that there's a lot of craving for, and it's right down the street, and you're just running down the street chasing it. It's like somebody's got it on the end of a fishing pole, and it's that carrot, and they're just like right ahead of you, and you're running after it. It's that thing that is, it's going to make you happy. And then suddenly, as you're running, you're almost out of breath, and as you're running, you see it vanish. Do you continue to run? It's like, no. It's like the thing's gone. It's gone. It's vanished. And so the same is true if you're being chased by the most horrific thing that you can imagine. You're running down the street and you're looking over your shoulder, and that thing is right there. It's coming after you. And you're running and you're running and you're about exhausted, and you look over your shoulder and suddenly you see the thing just vanish, just disappears. Do you continue to run? It's like, maybe just for good measure, little jog. But no, you don't. That's what it's like. When you see change, when you see that the thing you're chasing cannot be had, it's just release. It's just letting go. There, in the seeing, that is the disenchantment. The mindfulness has revealed the truth. That the appearance of the thing, like, oh, if I could only have that thing. When you're mindful, you see the truth. And suddenly, the mind is free, just naturally free. When we're mindful, we see clearly. And in the seeing clearly, the mind is liberated. And it's that liberating understanding. It's like, once you understand that the thing cannot be had, that the thing cannot be controlled, that the thing cannot be, escaped, it's just, oh, this is just nature, arising and passing away. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your practice. Thank you for the wisdom that recognizes the importance and value of the Dharma. It's the first Tuesday of the month, so you're all invited to stick around for tea, and we can talk more about Dharma stuff. May the benefit of this practice, may the merit of our time together, may it be a cause and a condition for our own liberation and the liberation of all beings without exception. May there be peace of mind, may there be joy in life, may there be insight and wisdom. And may you all know the blessing of the Triple Gem. Thank you.